that you see in the last section of the Iliad once Achilles is described this way. Achilles, in the end, is reintegrated into Mycenaean Homeric society, but it's only at the very end. It's at the very end when Achilles finally meets Hector's father, Priam. And finally, he decides, he's convinced actually by Priam to give the body of Hector back to his father so that his father and his family can mourn Hector. It's at that moment that it is as if in the Iliad, Achilles has now become a human again. He acknowledges the idea that his wrath, his anger, the idea that he refuses to return the body of Hector is not going to bring Patroclus back. It is as if in that kind of Mycenaean society, the notion of being able to deal with that kind of experience and being able to allow, for example, proper funeral, the burial of the dead, is fundamental to the functioning of society. And indeed, the Iliad ends with the funeral, so the funeral for Hector. So again, this problem of coping with what the ancients, the Greeks understood with this fundamental condition, but it was double question of reaching immortality through memory, or dealing, and at the same time dealing with the experience of loss and mortality. Now, let me switch to Orpheus. Very, very different myth. It's a little bit more, how can I put it, more cheerful, let's put it this way, although again, it's another, rather on some level, bleak story. Orpheus is again an exceptional individual, but for very different reasons. Not because, like Achilles, because he has this kind of, again, it's almost a superhuman warrior that can decide the fate of the entire Trojan War. No, it is because he has one fundamental ability. And I would describe the greater power of Orpheus in the following terms. It's an emotional kind of power, and it's very human again. Or the Greeks believed so. Orpheus, with his art, poetry, and song, can make you feel the way he feels, can really get into your soul, and can make you this kind of deep, profound form of human empathy, which, of course, the Greeks thought was uniquely human. So the great power of persuasion, by making you feel the way he feels, you cannot say no to what Orpheus wants you to feel. So he's an exceptional individual. But something happens, and this is the way, you know, at the beginning of the narrative, the story of Orpheus in Ovid's Metamorphosis, Orpheus is described, or the beginning of the story. The problem is Orpheus is getting married to Eurydice, but Eurydice dies. Again, mortality. And indeed, Ovid says Orpheus is actually just invited, you know, the deity associated with wedding to attend the marriage. And Orpheus' invitation to the god to attend his marriage was of no avail. For though he was certainly present, he did not bring good luck. Eurydice dies. And again, Orpheus cannot cope with the loss of Eurydice. But he's not Achilles. There is no wrath. There is no destruction. There is no inhuman annihilation of existence. Orpheus believes that the power of his art, his song, is so strong that he can actually defeat death itself and bring Eurydice back. How? He believes he can travel into the underworld, and with his song he can persuade the gods of the underworld to let Eurydice back. See, the power of song to persuade another soul in a way. And outside, in a way, the symbolism of the myth, it is as if Orpheus says, song can undo death. Such is the power of his art. So that's exactly what he does. He travels into the underworld. He sings for the gods of the underworld, and they're moved. They're moved by his plea. No other human was able to do that. Even death was moved. So they say, we'll let Eurydice go back with you. But there is a caveat. And I'm going to read the passage from Ovid. The king and the queen of the underworld could not bear to refuse his pleas. They called her Eurydice. She was among the ghosts who had but newly come, and walked slowly because of her injury. She was bitten by a snake. That's why she has that problem walking. Thracian Orpheus received her, but on condition that he must not look back until he had emerged from the valleys of Avernus, or else the gift he had been given would be taken from him. So we'll let Eurydice go with you, but you cannot turn back to see if she is behind you. You just have to trust us. Don't turn back. She's going to follow you, but you cannot look. What do you think he does? He turns back. Because he can't, and one of the key aspects of the myth is why. Why does he turn back? And there are different versions of the story. He didn't trust the gods, maybe. He didn't know. In one much later version, Eurydice actually wonders why he's not looking, or he's not talking to her. But for whatever reason, which is one of the key aspects of the myth, there's like in Greek tragedy, these are figures, so it's like this kind of tragic heroes that have a fundamental flaw. Despite what all the things they can do, they have a fundamental flaw. As I said, they're very often portrayed as more than human and all too human at the same time. And so he turns back, so he loses Eurydice forever. She dies again. And therefore, he goes back to Earth, and there are different versions of the myth. The one you see in Ovid, Orpheus is eventually killed by the Bacchantes, that is, women devoted to the cult of Dionysus. But there are different endings of the myth. And in Ovid, actually, which is a version of the myth that is the ending told in Ovid, which is not actually really repeated much later on. It doesn't become one of the standard ending of the myth. But in Ovid, what you see, it's a very interesting psychological insight into the experience of loss and mortality and what happened to Orpheus. Ovid actually says, now Orpheus is dead. So he goes down to the underworld because like Eurydice is dead. So Orpheus is actually reunited with Eurydice at the end, in the underworld, because they're both dead. But Ovid says, and they walk together. And Orpheus walks, and sometimes Eurydice walks behind him. And he turns back. It is as if he's trapped in that moment. He keeps turning back to see if Eurydice is there. Now, you don't find that version of the myth later on in adaptation, so you can also see why. It's a very gloomy, it's also, I should say, we don't have time to talk about this, it's a view of the underworld that you see in Greek mythology, even in the Iliad. This is very gloomy, very bleak in a way. But this myth Orpheus became the foundational myth of opera. And that's why we find this myth in music humanities. All the early experiments on opera, musical theater, we are talking about the end of the 16th century, the beginning of the 17th century, especially, let's say, 1600. These are musical settings of the myth of Orpheus, all of them. So the idea behind opera, and why do we have this form of theater in which people sing on stage all the time? What is the point of doing that? It's not exactly what we do in real life. Why do we even want to have this kind of theater in which people just sing? Well, it has to do with the myth of Orpheus, and not so much the idea of, again, the ending that you see in Ovid. So this is actually a work we study in music humanities. It's not really the first opera, but it's in a way the first opera we can really study because we have the music, we have the text, we have everything, and also it's the most influential of the early experiments in opera. Is the one that became a sort of a model for future, composers. And it's a version of the myth by a composer called Monteverdi, as you can see, 1607. And what was the idea? For them, the idea was what they found compelling about the myth of Orpheus, so to the point that, again, it becomes the very subject matter and even philosophy of opera, is this idea that there is a fundamental form of human interaction that can actually engage both the rational side of humans and the emotional side of humans. The humans, in the end, are both rational and emotional. And for them, there is this idea that the most powerful form of human communication would be a form of human communication that would engage both sides of what makes us human. And they thought that's what the myth of Orpheus really meant. That song, the combination of language, rational, and music, emotional, is the ultimate manifestation of the human ability to engage in this deep, profound form of communication, of empathy. And therefore the idea that Orpheus can actually undo death itself and again sort of bypass the fundamental condition of human mortality becomes a symbol of this unique human capacity to engage in that form of communication. And that's what they try to do in opera. They try to show you on stage, if we have action that of course will move you because of the events narrated on stage, and we have language which will appeal to your rational side, and everything is perfectly blended, that form of representation of human action, of human existence, will become irresistible. It will just, you will be taken. And therefore, Orpheus is not just an opera, a musical setting of the myth of Orpheus. Monteverdi's Orpheus, the opera, is a musical setting of a myth about music that tries to make you feel the power of music. It's a meta-musical story. It's music about music, told about the quintessentially musical myth, which is Orpheus. And so you find here again this kind of theme of this meditation on human mortality and the way human behavior seem to try to deal with this fundamental condition in very different ways. And on some level, it becomes, as I said in the brief description of this little presentation, it's an enigma. It's an enigma that it's clearly a preoccupation for the kind of literature that, you know, we have inherited on some level from a classical antiquity. And I want to conclude with this sort of dualism that you see in oh, sorry, this is actually the way, I forgot about this. This is actually the way Monteverdi's opera begins. It begins with a prologue in which you have the personification of music itself coming to stage. Because it gives you a sense that this opera is really about music. And in this, music herself comes on stage and she says, I am music, who in sweet accents can calm each troubled heart, and now with noble anger again. And now with love can kindle the most frigid minds. So in this opera, you have the personification of music telling the audience, because of course at that time it was a new form of spectacle. Opera didn't exist. So they had to tell what the people, what they were going to see. And it's not that Ovid comes on stage, although there is another opera in which Ovid comes on stage, or it's music. And she tells the audience, I am music, and I can do with your souls whatever I want to do. I can manipulate your souls. And that's exactly what you're going to experience as you watch this opera, the way Orpheus was able to move the gods of the underworld and defeat death itself. I'm going to conclude with this fundamental dualism that you see in this classical mythology, and that is a little bit alien to us today, this dualism between mortals and immortals, especially in the Iliad. These are things, I always, this is actually a concept I always discuss with the students. Because, when you look at the Iliad, and you have Athena, Zeus, and everybody else, what we call the gods. See, for us, it's a little counterintuitive for us to understand who they really are, what they represent, because when you read the Iliad, you realize that these gods are actually, well, first of all, they have a body. They're physical. They're bigger. They're clearly, they say, oh, they're huge, but they have a body. They feel pain. They're not, by the way, the repository of some kind of moral law. They behave very badly, even worse than humans sometimes. So they do all things that you may... So in what sense these are gods? What is the difference in a way between them and, let's say, Achilles or Agamemnon, the humans? Since there doesn't actually seem to be much of a difference because they're physical and they behave very much the way the humans behave on some level. Well, there's a fundamental difference. They are immortal. In the Iliad, the question, it's a very different notion of what these creatures, in a way, or these beings represent. The main difference is that they don't age and they don't die. And therefore, it is as if, when you read the Iliad, they become a sort of a foil for the mortality of humans. It is as if the Iliad is presenting you a world in which they're mortals. The real protagonists, on some level, are really the mortals. But it is as if the Iliad would ask, but what life would be if we were immortal? And that's the gods. It is as if they become this kind of leap of the imagination, and they're like humans, but they don't die, and therefore, and this is one of the things, of course, that become not easy to grasp, maybe for us today. And they're immortal, and therefore, in their behavior, they have nothing to lose. It doesn't matter. Humans have everything to lose. And so in the Iliad, you see this kind of dualism, which is a very, I have to say, it's a striking, in a way, meditation on the human condition that you also see in Orpheus. The gods of the underworld have nothing to lose. Orpheus has everything to lose. So you also come to the conclusion, and I'm going to stop here, especially in the Iliad, as you read the story of Achilles, Agamemnon, but also Zeus, Athena, Hephaestus, Aphrodite. And this, maybe it's me, but you may disagree, of course. You don't really relate to the gods that much. They're not, the story of the gods is not that interesting. it's not on some level, or that's the way I read it in a way. And in part because of what you see is that humans, by being defined by their own mortality, of course, they're very tragic figures in the Iliad. But at the same time, they're also capable of great actions of courage, generosity, sacrifice, self-sacrifice, and also violence, frankly. But because they're human. And therefore, on one side, they're very tragic. Zeus, for example, has a terrible view of humans. He believes it's a terrible condition. But the paradox you see in the Iliad, and also in a way in Orpheus, is exactly that. A perception of the tragic nature, but also at the same time, is what makes humans great. Their own mortality is what makes them tragic, and it's also what makes them great at the same time. Thank you very much. I need to ask, I don't know if there's, sorry, I don't know what time it is actually, so I don't know if there is time for questions, or maybe we should just conclude here, because I have, I don't know the time. Okay, so maybe we should conclude here. Okay. Sorry, I talked too much. So it's already 11. At least I didn't go over time. Okay, well, maybe we should just, oh, sorry. Yes.
I have a microphone. Sorry.
So in this continuum between mortals and immortals, where does Odysseus fit?
Very good. Okay, oh, I wish we had more time, but there is a moment in the Odyssey that in my view defines a little bit the issue of mortality again, maybe in a slightly different way compared to the Iliad, even though there is a fundamental point of contact. And this is actually when we finally encounter Odysseus again in the Odyssey, which is not the very beginning. The first 4 books, everybody talks about him, but he's not there. Fine, and nobody knows where he is. Finally, we find him on the island, the island of this Calypso, this figure, a female sorceress. In a way, you have a lot of those in a kind of mythology, and Odysseus is being kept on this island. There's a love maybe between Calypso and Odysseus, but Odysseus is not happy. He's been there for 7 years. And at some point, the gods, this is the way the Odyssey begins, say, we have to let him go. We have to tell Calypso that enough is enough. She has to let him go so that he can go home. Calypso, of course, agrees and says, okay, fine. But she tries one more thing to convince Odysseus maybe to stay. And guess what? She offers Odysseus immortality, to become immortal. And Odysseus says no. So this is a human, it happens in classical mythology occasionally, although there are a few figures of humans that become immortal or are given the opportunity to become immortal. And of course, you wonder why. Odysseus, of course, says, I want to go home, I want to see Penelope, my wife, I want to... It is as if, and again, there may be different interpretations of the passage, it is as if, on one side, Odysseus can't even entirely comprehend as a human what being immortal means, in the sense, sorry, it's going to sound a little silly now, it is as if it's boring. You're immortal, but what is he longing for? Family, action, a life with other humans. See, it is as if, again, in the end, Odysseus wants to be human, even though he understands that his life is going to be whatever it's going to be, and indeed, going back to this is another famous aspect. As I said, the Iliad, the first word in Greek that you find in the Iliad that defines the work is menin, wrath, but in that sense of divine, beyond human anger, which is, as I said, exactly what happens later on in the Iliad. The first word of the Odyssey, man, human. I hope that answered your question, maybe. Thank you. I think we need to conclude here. Thank you so much again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
everybody safe from the wind? This is quite incredible, isn't it? It hasn't been this cold here for a long time, so we'll get used to it. So I am Julia Hirschberg. I'm a professor in computer science at Columbia. I've been here since 2002. Before that, I was at Bell Labs, where I learned how to do speech work. And that's what I've been doing with my students since I've been at Columbia. So today, what I want to talk to you about is some of the things our department is doing for students. And then I want to talk about some of the things that our group is doing on speech. And then I'll dive down into one project that a lot of people find interesting and sometimes amusing. And then I'll be happy to take some questions. The clicker is not working. Ah, good. I just have to press it harder, clearly. So this is a picture of my speech lab back when we could all be in the lab, which was a while back. And as you see, we have a lot of students. There are PhD students, master's students, and they're undergraduates as well. All of them participate with most of my faculty and also the faculty in engineering. We always have a number of different categories of students, which we're very happy about. I beg your pardon, was there a question? Or somebody outside is talking?